Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining for this first webinar of March, Managing Reproductive Programs. Before I introduce our speaker, I have a couple announcements. First, thank you. Just a reminder, thank you to our sponsor, CattleScan, and with their support, we're able to bring to you these programs with no cost at all. So thank you to our sponsor. Without further ado, I want to introduce our speaker today, Dr. Matias Stangaferro. He's now a consultant with DHMS. So thank you, Matias, for doing this, and I will stop sharing my screen so you can start sharing yours.
Okay, thank you very much for the introduction, and thanks to all the ProData team for the invitation. It's a pleasure for me to be part of this webinar series. So today I'm going to talk about managing repro programs, right? And when we talk with Daniela about this or how to present the data, it was just right after Julio gave his presentation last week. So it's a little bit complicated because we have been working with Julio for many years now. So I think the approach today is going to be a more practical application of what we see in the farm, what we usually do at a farm level, but also to match that up with what Julio presented last week, right? So Julio last week presented this concept about targeted repro management, right? A targeted repro management, precision repro management, many different words to define the same thing. But what we are doing is just trying to put some magnifying glasses, right? Close this. Put some magnifying glasses on the cows to try to find out some similarities or some differences between cows to group them in different buckets. And because we are reproductive physiologists and we love repro, we tend to put the magnifier glasses in the cow's butt in general. But we have other differences, biological differences, management differences, etc., that they can allow us to put cows in different buckets that Julio presented last week. So although the concept is new, Julio just published the paper in 2022, as I showed in the references before. I think the way we are managing cows has been doing that for the last 20 years, 10, 20 years, right? And one of the first two big buckets that we can subdivide cows based on difference in biology and management is in just primiparous cows and multiparous cows, right? Those type of animals are very different biologically. For example, the lactation curves are different, right? The first lactation, they don't peak much, they have a more persistent lactation. The requirements are different. First lactation animals are still growing, so they have a different requirement. They are a requirement for growth compared to second and greater lactations. In general, fertility is different, right? And just as an anecdote, many years ago, when I finished vet school, like 14 years ago, I started working as a repro consultant in Argentina in grazing dairies. And the worst fertility was achieved at first lactation. And it's kind of the opposite that we have seen in the last decades, right? Where like well-managed first lactation animals are the most fertile because of they are younger, and in general, they achieve better pregnancies per AI, right? When those animals are not managed well, when we're not feeding those animals and in these grazing herds to meet their requirements, talking about grazing herd with all the cows, commingled cows and heifers, so competition, not enough feed, these animals are still growing. So this could be the worst repro if they are not well managed, right? But again, all these are are correlated, right? The requirement with the fertility or the capacity to express that potential fertility, and the same with the genetics, right? In general, those first lactation animals and the younger animals in our herds are the best fertility because we are improving with this insemination years over years. right? And all these differences biologically allow us to apply different type of management in these two different buckets, right? For example, we can apply a different voluntary waiting period. We can use a different semen type or an embryo, for example, like using more sex semen in our first genetic, which is the first lactation in general, and there are more fertile animals, right? So we can start differentiating these two big groups, right? About what we're going to do in terms of voluntary waiting period, semen, repro, etc., based on this biology, right? And again, this is not a new concept, right? And I'm just trying to get this targeted repro management, as Julio presented, on the most basic way, applied to the farm that we have been doing for over the years, right? If you think about it, again, concept is not new. This is an example, right? Dailycom screenshot of days in milk at first breeding, right? You can clearly see by color, each color is a cow, each dot here, right? And we have the second and third lactation and greater animals, right? Like parity, second parity and greater in blue and green, and our first lactation animals in red. And you can see here over time the difference, right? You can see the method for submission to first service in this graph, right? Like this is a weekly cohort submitted to Time AI. You can see every week, every 7 days, you have a cohort of animals bred on the same day, right? Voluntary waiting period, and this is what we were talking about. Some of the big difference on management that we can apply to these animals are different. For example, the second and greater lactation animals have a voluntary waiting period here about 69 days. So they're breeding between 69 and 75 days, 2 plus minus 3. And the younger cows, right, lactation 1, are 10 days later, 82 plus minus 3. So a voluntary waiting period of 79 days, right? So this is a pretty basic difference that we have been managed over the years, right? And it applies to this concept of differentiating or putting cows in subgroups within a bucket, right? So now here we talk about differences in voluntary waiting period, but in this case, for example, we also have a difference in protocol, right? We can see here first lactation animals in red, all submitted, as we saw before, to 100% Time AI protocol every 7 days, right? With a voluntary waiting period of about 86 days. And then as a different type of strategy, the older cows have a voluntary waiting period of about 55 days, 55, 54, and they're being submitted to receive first service in heat, right? You can see these dots all over. They're breeding cows in heat every day, and then the cows that are not breeding heat go into Time AI. We will talk a little bit more about this type of protocols that are a combined protocol between breeding cows in heat and then sending to Time AI the cows that didn't show heat. So pretty different management that we can apply based on just dividing cows in a very big subgroup, right? First lactation, second lactation and greater. And then it's also important not just to apply different management, but also to understand when we evaluate repro in a farm, where are the biggest opportunities? In which type of subgroup of animals we have more opportunities to improve either fertility or heat detection or time to pregnancy. So again, if we put the magnifier glasses, there is also another big, two big buckets that we can differentiate here in this concept of targeted repro management, right? The other two big buckets are the cows that are going to receive first service and the cows that are going to receive second and subsequent services, right? These are two very different buckets that allow us to apply different management because of the difference in biology, right? Like as we mentioned before for lactation 1 and lactation 2 or greater. One of the big differences between these two buckets of cows, right, or these two subgroup of cows, sorry, is that the first one is that we know the repro status. What do I mean with that we know the repro status? We know for cows that are going to receive the first service that they have never been bred before after calving. Therefore, those cows are open, right? All these cows are open, and because of that, and because we know that, we can apply repro protocols that include prostaglandin without the risk of inducing abortion in cows, right? That's a pretty big difference compared to cows that are going to receive second and subsequent services that after the first services, after they receive the first service, we don't know if the cow is pregnant or open until the pre-check. So we cannot use any protocol or any resynchronization strategy that include prostaglandins, right? Until we do the pre-check in those cows and we know that that cow is open. That's a pretty big difference. The other big difference is that the time we have to synchronize those animals. In these cows, in this subgroup, we have a lot of time, right? From calving until at least 45 days or more, 50, 60, 70 days voluntary waiting period, whatever we want to set up. We have a lot of time to synchronize the cows, so we can apply very long type of protocols like the double off-sync protocol that I'm going to show you later, that it requires 27 days to be completed, right? Now, for cows receiving the second and subsequent breeding, we need to inseminate those animals as soon as possible after the pre-check. Why? Because we are doing the pregnancy diagnosis at about minimum of 28 days after the first breeding. So once we discover she's open, she's been already like 30 days, around 30 days or more, without being rebred. So we need to rebred that cow as soon as possible. So we cannot apply a very long protocol, like I mentioned before, the double off-sync that takes 27 days, because that cow will be rebred around 60 days after their first breeding, and that's a lot. So after the cow is bred for the first time, if we know it's open, we need to rebreed her as soon as possible, so we don't have plenty of time to synchronize that cow. We need to do it as short as possible. Other differences in biology, again, we have fertility, negative energy balance. They are all like interconnected, right? Like depending of the days in milk that we decide for first service based on the voluntary waiting period, that cow will be in a more severe, like less or lower negative energy balance, or might be increasing already, and she might be in a positive energy balance, right, by the time of first service, and that might change and might affect the fertility between first service and second and subsequent services, depending on how soon we are start breeding those animals. In general, when we evaluate farm, one of the most common concepts is that first service tend to be more fertile than second and subsequent services. Now, having said that, it depends a lot on management and what we described before about the days in milk at first service. And here we have one example that we are comparing two farms here. And within each farm, you have here the first service, and you have second, third, and so on and so forth services, right? In this farm that you are seeing here in the left, this farm have a quite short voluntary waiting period, 50 days voluntary waiting period, and they're breeding cows in HIDAS by using a prostaglandin-based protocol. We're going to talk a little bit about that later, right? Like they're using a freezing off-sync, they're giving PGs. I'm breeding cows in heat after the PGs, and the cows that were not bred in heat, they go to time AI. They breed about 70 to 75% of the cows in heat. You're going to see this acronym a lot in this presentation. This is stand for estrus detected AI. So these are cows bred in heat. Have over 70% of the cows bred in heat. This is a Jersey farm. And here we have, for example, a farm that is Holstein that are breeding 100% time AI with the double off-sync protocol, with different voluntary waiting period. In first lactation, we have a 90-day voluntary waiting period, and in older cows, we have a 60 days. So first thing you notice is that in this farm, right, pregnancy period first service is 36%. And if you compare that versus second and subsequent services, right, the conception at first service is lower than the second, third, and fourth, and so on services. That is not uncommon to see in farms with a short voluntary waiting period, just breeding cows in heat, right? On the other side, you will see a cow with 100% time AI with a protocol that is designed to maximize pregnancies per AI. So you can see that pregnancies per AI at first service, it's much greater than second and subsequent services, right? This is more common to see when you have a little bit longer voluntary waiting periods or when you have like 100% time AI protocol. So when you compare these two farms, you can notice quite a bit of a difference in pregnancies per AI at first services, right? Like 14 percentage point. Now, second and subsequent services, in this farm, we have 44%. In this farm, we have 41%, are about the same, 3 percentage point difference. And overall conception is 40% in this farm and is 45% in this farm. So if we stop there, we think, okay, well, this farm have better repro performance, right? But that's not all that matter. And Julio showed last week some of these targeted repro management. When you start comparing or breeding cows in heat earlier, the cows that can show heat and are cycling, and then submitting cows for time AI later compared to 100% time AI, and you can achieve the same time to pregnancy. Why? Because this substantial difference also in voluntary waiting period. In general, farms that are breeding cows in heat early in lactation by heat detection have shorter voluntary waiting periods. You can see here about 50 days in this farm, compared to this one that as an average, it could be over 70 days, 75 days. So when you compare preg rates of these two farms, right, and you adjust by voluntary waiting period, and you put both at the same voluntary waiting period, let's put both at 50 days, this farm have now the same pregnancy rate. Why? Because we're losing a cycle here, right? We're starting about 21, 25 days later, so they don't think we are missing hits for a cycle, ended up being the same pregnancies per AI. So as Julio showed last week, this is just a practical way to do it with just comparing farms. There could be, we can achieve different, like similar time to pregnancy during lactation, right? Similar preg rate with two very different repro management and with two very different pregnancies per AI at first service and very different fertility overall, right? So there are different options, and that's what matters, and that's important to know. So going back to the bucket about repro management, right? We talk about these two big buckets here that we can differentiate between first lactation primiparous cows and multiparous cows, and also these two big buckets about first service and second and subsequent services, right? And then when you evaluate repro, right? If you go to a farm and you have to start evaluating repro, or you have to apply different repro protocols, I think these big four groups is when where we can start, right? Then we can go deeper into more precision, into more targeted repro based on some of the concepts that Julio showed last week, but we have been doing this forever and just apply to the same concept. The way I would like to see that is not just four different groups, but just two big groups, right? First service and second and subsequent services, with two buckets within each group, right? Which we have within first service, we have our first lactation and our older animals. And within second and subsequent services, we have, again, our first lactation and our older animals. And because of all these differences that I just mentioned in biology, and there are many more, we can apply different management. And then at the time of evaluating, we can assess which subgroup is performing as we expected and which subgroup is not performing as we expected, and we have a bigger opportunity to improve reproductive outcomes, right? So that's kind of like a big picture about managing for a subgroup of animals, right? Then just for the sake of time, let's focus on one subgroup, right? One of these big subgroups, I mentioned first services, right? We have these two group of cows, first lactation, second as subsequent services, and all these factors mentioned here are factors that are, they might influence, and they actually influences reproductive performance for these first services, right? And you can see that there are not just straight arrows from these factors to the buckets, and it's more like a circle. Why this is happening, or why it is designed like that, is because all these factors are interrelated. They're connected among each other, right? For example, health issues during the transition period might impact, and you will see some data before, after this slide, right? Might impact pregnancies, perinatal first services, right? But also cows that become sick during the transition period, they usually are cows that they lost more body condition score. And because of that, cows that lost body condition score in a more severe way, they have impaired reproductive performance. So they are interconnected and they both affect pregnancies, perinatal. At the same time, right, lower body condition score or a greater loss of body condition score is associated with more anovulation and lower cyclicity. So if the cows are not cyclic, the risk of becoming pregnant or the odds of becoming pregnant is also lower, right? The protocol we implement is all related with that, because there are protocols that might induce cyclicity and fix all these errors. I'm going to show you later about this. And there are some protocols that depends on cyclicity, depends that the cow have a CL to perform well, right? To make the cow show heat and that cow to be bred and get pregnant. Genetic is also a big piece of this, right? Genetic might influence directly through all these fertility traits now have been investigated more and more through genomics. That genetic can affect directly the reproductive outcome, not just the first service, but in all services. But they also can affect health, right? We know there is a lot of traits directly related with health. And if that cow has less health issues, there is more chances for her to become pregnant. It also defines the requirements. And if the cow meet the requirements, right, they're going to have less body condition score losses and will affect repro. The same body condition score, right, as we mentioned, right, cows that are calving too fat, they have a bigger change of body condition score and they have a greater risk of metabolic disorders, so that they also impact repro. So you can see here how all is interrelated, and we also have voluntary waiting period that depending on the time we allow cows to recover, it might also affect the result for first service, because if we give them more time, those will have more cows cycling, we will have more cows starting recovering for body condition score and a positive energy balance, and more time to recover for health issues, right? So this is all interconnected. This is all affecting first service outcome, right? And we're going to see some examples of this. This is one of the examples, right? In this study, we have here health and cyclicity, right? In this study, they grouped the cows in 4 different groups based on if they are cyclic, right? If they have a CL, cyclic versus non-cyclic versus anovulatory, and if they have or not what is called here cytological endometritis, which is an infiltration of PMNs, of inflammatory cells in the endometrium of the uterus, so a uterine disease, right? And you can see here this survival analysis showing the proportion of cows not pregnant, right? At day 0, so at calving or at 30 days, all the cows are open, right? As soon as they are becoming pregnant, this line is going down. And you can see here 50% of the cows pregnant achieved by a certain point, right? So the black line here is the cows that are cyclic, right? They have a CL and they are healthy. And you can see how these cows become pregnant faster during the lactation than all the other groups. Then you have the cows that have cytological endometritis, right? So they have lower time to pregnancy during lactation, and it's quite similar than the cows that are anovulatory, right? But they don't have a uterine disease, they're just not cyclic. And then in the worst group, we have the combination of both, right? If they are not cyclic and if they have a urinary disease, you can see that the time to pregnancy during lactation get much slower than the other group. So there's an additive effect, as I was mentioning, right, before. These diseases are not just working by themselves, but there's an additive effect when they are just working together, right? The other thing we just talked in all these factors affecting first cervix was genetic, right? And now we have this super powerful tool that is genomic selection, right? Genomic selection, here you have two different index for genomic selection. For example, this is the daily wellness profit from the clarified test from Zoetis. This is the 2020 emphasis. You can see that this index includes traits of production, but it also now, these indices are including more and more traits, functional traits, fertility traits, health traits, right? You have health, you have longevity, you have some functional traits, conformation, and fertility, and the same is happening with the new net merit, right, by the CDCB. This was updated in 2021, where you have all these green pieces of the pie here being fertility, like cow conception, DPR, etc. We have functional trait, you have some of health traits, right? So now all these indices allow us to select cows, not just for milk, not just for one factor, but a combination of factors with more emphasis on fertility, on health, on functional traits, and not just focusing on milk, right? So this is an example for our database, a trial we did in about 9,000 heifers where we followed during lactation. And it's just as a secondary outcome of interest. We have genomic, and we classify those heifers, over 9,000 heifers, in low, medium, and high genomic productive life. And this is one of the traits, productive life, based on tertiles. So the lowest, 33%, 33 to 66, the highest, 66% for the genomic productive life. And here we have the percentage of endometritis. So this is a farm that checked every single cow at day 25, looking for endometritis. When you see this, there is a linear decrease on the percentage of the indices, the incidence of endometritis with genomic productive life, right? The highest genomic productive life, the lowest is endometritis, right? And this is related to what I showed you 2 slides ago, showing the impact of endometritis, of cytological endometritis. In the other case, this one is just clinical endometritis or purine vaginal discharge over fertility, right? This is have a direct effect on fertility, and it's just health. We can also select, we can also check our cows by some of the fertility traits. In this case, we use genomic DPR. You can argue that it's not probably the best trait to evaluate pregnancies per AI because there are other traits like cow conception rate that are more related with conception. Here we evaluate anyway DPR, and we classify the cows again in tertiles between low, medium, and high based on DPR. And we evaluate pregnancies per AI for service. This is first lactation animals. You can see also the increase between the low and the high genomic DPR. It's almost 20 percentage point difference in pregnancies per year for service. And this is huge, right? This is just the practical implementation or the practical evaluation of the genomic test that they give more and more validation that this type of selection works. Now, when I saw this type of data, when I started looking at the data, I got fixated, right? Like I focused on, well, we need to select cows by with more emphasis in DPR, right? But then I started running some correlations between genomic correlations between DPR. You can see here in the x-axis, and some of the traits. Here is the or indices. This is the index. This is the genetic net merit, and this one you can see is the DPR and the genomic potential for milk production. You can see that when you evaluate genomic DPR and net merit, there is almost no correlation, right? The slope here is $3.3 for every unit increase in DPR. Not a big, and you can see dispersion. Every single dot here is a cow. We have over 9,000 cows, so you can see this big big correlation. So, however, when we move to the genomic potential for milk production and correlation with DPR, and this is not new, right? It's just putting into some of data what we all know, I have been demonstrated, is that there is a negative correlation between genomic DPR and the potential for milk production. And that slope that you see here is minus 215. So 215 pounds less for every unit increase in DPR. Now, having said that, and this is where it gets important, the genomic selection, we should select for index, right? For an index that include a little bit of a portion or a percent of every single trait, and not just by one trait. And if we focus on trait, we need to select this type of animals, right? And if we were a bull, this type of animal with high DPR and high milk production, or high DPR and high genetic mating, right? So now moving on a little bit about other of the factors that I mentioned in that big in that slide, and all the factors that are affecting first services, because this is a talk about repro management. Let's focus a little bit and talk a little bit about repro product, right? And again, I put this at the end because it's just not all, right? We tend to think that, okay, repro physiologists, people working in repro management, we tend to fix on repro solutions, right? Protocols, modifying protocols, doing different protocols. But again, there is a lot of different factors that will impact the results of this type of protocols, that they don't depend just on applying correctly or modifying the protocol, right? Like, as I mentioned, health, genetic, etc. Now, moving on, I'm going to the part that we really like. It's about protocols, right? For first services that we are focusing now, these are the two most common repro protocols that we can that are being applied around the world, right? And again, I said, like, these are the two biggest, but there's a lot of modifications, right? So to put a little bit more into buckets, just following Julio's idea about buckets and targeted repro management, we can consider this type of protocol, like the pre-sync off-sync I showed you before. How do you see the first service graph in Datacom of causability with a pre-sync off-sync? Remember, it's just two prostaglandin. The original pre-sync off-sync is just two PGs, 14 days apart, and then 14 to 12 days later, cows go to an off-sync protocol, right? What most people have done, this was a protocol designed for 100% time AI, but what most people have done is to use this type of protocols to breed cows in, or pre-synchronizations to breed cows in heat. So we call this prostaglandin-based protocol, so PG-based protocol. What does it mean? Is that the pre-synchronization is just based on PGs, right? Right before going to the off-sync, this is the pre-synchronization, is just based on PGs. So the PG, what it does is that it induces CL regression, right? So the cow will, if the cow have a CL and we regress the CL, she will show heat. But it only works with cows that are cycling. So because PG induce luteal regression, they have to be a CL present to induce luteolysis, and then the cows show heat, right? So having said that, this is a protocol that is ideal for farms that want to do estrus detected AI, right? Because we are giving PG, the cows will show heat. We're giving PGs, the cows will show heat. And then after that, if you want to breed cows in heat, after that, the cows that do not show heat, they can go to a time AI, right? The most common way to implement this is that to match this PG with the end of the voluntary waiting period, right before the end of the voluntary waiting period, and start breeding cows in heat right after the second PG, right? For 12 days, for 14 days, and then the cows not breeding heat here, going to the time AI. But there are a lot of different modifications, right? People breeding after the first PG, people giving 3 PGs and breeding every time after every PG. So there's a different modification. So we put all those protocols just based on PGs and breeding cows in heat on PG-based protocol. right? Now, this is also ideal for farms that, again, if for farms that have cyclic cows and farms that have activity monitors, right? Where you have a good tool to detect cows in heat and you probably want to maximize it. And if the cows are cyclic and you apply this type of the protocol, it can work pretty well. Now, on the other hand, we have double offsing here. One of the most common protocols being applied today for first service is a protocol that maximizes pregnancies per AI, right? And you can see it's just one offsync, and 7 days apart, you start the other offsync. So the pre-synchronization includes several GNRH. And because this protocol is designed for 100% time AI, the cows will go with 1, 2, 3, and 4 GNRH before the breed. So we call this protocol a GNRH-based protocol, right? Compared to this one, that most of the cows are bred in heat just after 1 or 2 PGs. So now, the GNRH, what it does is induces ovulation. So the cows will not show heat. So it's the opposite. Right? If we want to breed cows in heat, we shouldn't apply a protocol like this because the cows will not show heat. It improves cyclicity because it induces ovulation. So we're going to improve cyclicity on those animals. And it's ideal for farms that want to do 100% time AI. And as I say, it maximizes pregnancies per AI in farms with good compliance. And this is very important. Why? Because we are depending on giving the shots at the right time, the right day, to whenever we breed the cows. So whenever we design this, we say, okay, we're going to breed the cows on Thursday at 7 a.m. So we need to give everything perfect, all these shots perfectly, to have the cows perfectly synchronized for that Thursday at 7 a.m., for example. If we don't do this correctly, the results are a disaster. Right? It's not like this one that we are breeding cows in heat, right? So some of the data to support some of the statements before, we said that the double offsync induces cyclicity. You can see here an example. We did this study. We published this study in 2018. This is part of another study, but you can see here, we started double offsync at 33 days in milk, or we started double offsync at 61 days in milk. So at the time of starting, right, we measure progesterone and compare the proportion of cow cycle. So if we start at 33 days in milk, this depends on the voluntary waiting period, right? We have only 57% of the cow cycling. Now, if we give cows more time, a longer voluntary waiting period, we have more cow cycling, 79%. Now, after giving these 2 PGs, right, at the moment of starting this breeding part of the offsync, the breeding offsync, these cows have 50 days now, the one that we started at 33. And 90% of those cows are cyclic. So we force them to cycle. It's 90% of the cow cyclic compared to 79 at 61 days if we don't give anything, right? And these cows now that we start at 71, they have 78 days. 61, they have 78 days. Now there is 93% of the cow cycling. So there is no difference in cyclicity at 50 days or at 78 days if we apply the double offsync because we force them to ovulate. So it induces cyclicity. Now, also we said before that that this protocol suppress heat expression, right? And this is a trial that Julio, we did with Julio. Julio showed last week some of the results of this trial. I'm not going to go into details, but just to show you that there is 56 hours between this prostaglandin here of the double offsync and this GNRH. And we give only 56 hours. So when we give this GNRH, only 5% or less than 5% of the cows show heat. And if we compare that with 56 hours, we compare that with 80 hours. So we give 24 more hours, right? And the proportion of cows in heat in this group, improved to 30%. Now, these 2 farms where we did the trial, they have activity monitors, and we collect information also that any single cow that was in heat either before the GNRH or after the GNRH, like all the time, up to the day of the time AI. And in this group, just the regular double offsync, we have only less than 30% of the cows expressing heat because we are giving the GNRH very early, and we are suppressing heat. Compared to this one with 80 hours, where we achieve almost 80% of cows bred in heat. Now, having said that, when we compare overall pregnancies per AI, was no differences between group, right? I mean, we save some money on not giving gene rage in some cows, in the 30% of the cow, but it's just minimum, and we didn't improve pregnancy per AI. What we noticed in that trial, Julio showed some data last week, is that these 20% of the cows that didn't show heat, right? Like we have 80% of the cows that show heat. These 20% of the cows that show heat, pregnancy per AI was very low, and was the one pushing this number down. So the following step, I'm not going to go deep into that because Julio showed some data. It's just to point out some of the things I wanted to point out, is that instead of doing 80 hours, we compare these 80 hours versus just not giving the gene rage at all. Okay, we breed cows for 7 days, right? And if the cows show heat, we breed these cows in heat. If they don't show heat, they go to a cedar sync program. And why a cedar sync program? Because those 20% of the cows that didn't show heat in the last study, the conception was pretty bad. They were not well synchronized. So we're putting on a protocol that will maximize fertility for those cows that are not well synchronized. But then to make that work with the rest of the farm's activity, we did the same for second and subsequent breeding, right? So the cows are rebreeding heat. We did the pregnancy diagnosis. If the cows were open and they have a CL, here we go to the regular protocol, but if here, focus on this protocol. If they were open and have a CL, we did the same. We give 2 PGs, breed cows in heat for 7 days, and then if they are not breeding heat, we put on a cedar sync. So exactly the same as the last part of the first breeding. And they didn't have a CL, we put it directly in the cedar sync, right? There is no reason for giving PGs and wait for those animals because they don't have a CL, so the PG will not do anything. So when we see the results, right, we improve the expression of heat. And let's just focus on this group, right? Like 88% of the cows show heat in these 7 days. And most of them show heat in the first 5 days. Actually, in the first 4 days, the 5, 6, and 7, not many cows show heat. And the pregnancy per AI was quite high for this group, but also in the cedar sync, right? That usually that 12% of the cows are the cows that are not well synchronized, are the worst cows. We improved pregnancy per AI in those cows that otherwise will be less than 30%. We took it to 45%. Now, when we compare groups in pregnancy per AI, we improve overall 7 percentage points, right? But in primiparous cows, we got a 14 percentage point difference, and in multiparous cows, at 4 percentage points. This is important to highlight because, again, as I mentioned before, right, we can divide these 2 buckets, and we can apply different management if we want to first lactation and second and subsequent breeding, because we know that the one that benefit the most are the first lactation. We still get a good benefit in multiparous cows, but if we get no benefit or something negative, or we don't want to apply this protocol to everybody because it might increase cost because of the cedar, we can focus on first lactation and get most of the benefit. Now, what are the advantages of this protocol? And Julio showed some results of that, so I didn't spend much time explaining the trial. I want to explain some of the practical applications. So the first one is that it maximizes pregnancy per AI. Maximize the estrus detected AI. It maximizes breeding cows in heat. So you have activity monitoring, you want to maximize breeding cows in heat. This is a protocol that we can still do it, but also maximize fertility. So you get the most of both, right? We said before, we do this PG-based protocol, it maximizes estrus detected AI, but you don't get the highest fertility. We do this, the double offsing, you do 100% time AI, so you don't breed cows in heat on one side, but if you do with good compliance, you maximize pregnancy per AI. Well, here you have both, the best of all things. You maximize heat expression and you maximize fertility. And then you only use time AI for problem cows, right? Those cows, this 12%, 13% that are not well synchronized, well, we'll put in a protocol that will help them to succeed. It is ideal for farm with activity monitor, right? And again, you're applying a lot of shots, you have to do a lot of work. If you have activity monitors that you can do a really good heat detection, this protocol works pretty well. And this is something that I added because we have these problems before, right? It's based on experience. It is less sensitive to errors in applications, right? It's less sensitive to compliance. And why I'm saying that, I'm not saying that you should do it if you don't have good compliance, but if you apply a double offsing protocol, and this is based on experience, if you apply a double offsing protocol in a farm that doesn't have good compliance, the results could be a disaster, right? Because you're breeding the cows in heat, The cows, sorry, by time AI, this day of the week at this time, the cows are not well synchronized because they're not giving the shot. In this case, in the worst case scenario, you're giving 2 PGs and breeding cows in heat. So in the worst case scenario, you will have probably the same pregnancies per AI than a regular pre-sync off-sync that you're breeding just cows after a PG, right? Not like applying incorrectly a double off-sync that you will have like a much, much lower pregnancies per AI because the cows are not well synchronized and you're just breeding cows that are not in the right time to receive semen. Disadvantages that it potentially increase the cost of hormones. We're using seeders here, and also heat detection must be excellent, right? If we don't have good heat detection, this is not going to work. So some practical application of this, right? We have these 2 protocols, right? The first service, second and subsequent services, right? With advantages and disadvantages. But what you can see here now that we are just giving 2 PGs and breeding most of the cows in heat for first service, and the same for second and subsequent services, is that the only GnRH we are giving in the afternoon is just the cows going to seed, which there are not too many. So one of the most common issues that farms are facing now, and we wanted to do a trial with Julio, we haven't done it yet, is just nobody wants to do the PG in the afternoon. Well, nobody. Farms like with large pens that are not working on a sorting gate, it is a problem to give shots in the afternoon, right? Like especially like, for example, a dry lot in a place like California or Mexico with like a very, very big pen, dry lot in the middle of August, where it's like really, really hot with severe heat stress, and the cows are out of the parlor and they don't want to lock up, and then you have to find those cows to give the shots. It's not an easy job, and it's related with failures on compliance because then the workers get tired, they don't give the shots, and the cows are not well synchronized. So what can we do with this protocol is to replace this 7-day seeder sync, right, by a 5-day co-sync, which is a very common protocol for heifers. It works pretty well in cows too. So some of the research that have been done or review that have been done comparing these 2 protocols show that the results are similar. So you can apply either one or the other one. So if you do this, you're giving the time AI at the day of the GnRH at the day of the time AI. So you don't have any GnRH in the afternoon, the entire synchronization for first or second subsequent breeding. That's an advantage. The disadvantage is that, so again, no GnRH afternoon. The disadvantage is that you have shots in many different days of the week because it's a 5-day protocol. We are applying this to farms, like a large farm, 6,000 cows or more, that are just moving from weekly activities to daily activities. They don't just want to do weekly cohorts because they have too many cows in a single day, for example, for projects. So they are now moving toward working daily in a sorting gate. In those farms, it works pretty well because you have shots every single day anyway, and checking cows every single day. And if not, in a weekly cohort, it gets a little bit complicated with the shots and the days of the week. For example, this is some weekly examples, right? How you see the calendar of a 7-day heat detection and a 7-day seeder sync. You have your regular first part of double off-sync, then you detect cows in heat. If you start a Monday, if you start here, right? Like if you get this PG on a Monday, most of the cows will show heat and be bred on Thursday and Friday. Most of them, almost no cows will show heat Saturday, Sunday, and Monday. And if by Monday they didn't show heat, they go to a seeder sync that is 7 days. You have this PG in this GnRH in the afternoon. So with a 5-day co-sync, and this is an example, you can move it to any place you want in the day, but right, the 10 days of the week. Now you do 7 days heat detection, you put the seeder on a Monday. Now you have to take it out on a Saturday, and you have to give a PG on a Sunday, right? It's not very practical for some of the farms. Now, having said that, as I said before, most of the cows show heat on Thursday and Friday. Almost no cows show heat on days 5, 6, and 7. So you can short that up to 5 days, right? Like I'm showing here. Now it changed, right? Like started with Monday here. But you can just give 5 days and start your seeder sync 5 days later. And here you have a little bit of a different protocol. You have your time AI on Monday, but you still have to take out seeders on Sunday. right, and give shots on Saturday. So it's a little bit more complicated if you're working with weekly cohort, but it's still possible, and you have to balance there if you prefer to give GnRH in the afternoon or if you prefer to have shots in many different days of the week. Now, having said that, and as I mentioned before, this protocol works very, very well in farms with good or excellent heat detection. Right? And we have been applying this protocol with 5 days and 5-day costing, etc. in many farms, working really well. There was on 7 and 7, but there was a farm that didn't work very well. And I'm going to show you here. Generally, I don't like to compare before and after, but I think it is worth in this case to show it. This is pretty recent. You can see here over time pregnancies per AI in a farm, right? This is a farm in Mexico with very severe heat stress. And how you see year over year, well, you can see here October of 2022, right? And you can see here October 2023, and the pregnancy is up to here, right? When we apply, so this farm was doing a double off-steam protocol. Usually this time of the year, October, the pregnancies per AI start going up because the heat stress start getting less severe and the days start cooling down. So you can see here, for example, last year between October the 1st and here November 15 was about 38% pregnancies per AI, right? Which is a regular double off-steam and a regular short steam second and subsequent services protocol. Anyway, that Julio showed last week. But then we started here, we said, okay, in October the 1st here, we decided, okay, we're gonna switch the protocol and we'll start breeding cows in heat and apply this type of the protocol. You can see pregnancies per AI was down compared to last year, pretty severely. And it matched up with what we saw in the farm. That's what I'm showing year over year. We went to the farm was switching between activity monitors. Only or less than half of the cows have activity monitors. The other didn't have anything because the new ones were delayed. And the personnel was very confused, right? So they had to do like an excellent heat detection, but they didn't have activity monitors or start like overdoing what they had to do for heat detection and breeding cows that were not really in heat. Plus, a lot of cows mix up between pens, so a lot of movement to correct where they were mixing cows in the parlor. So a lot of false positive for heat ended up with a pretty bad result for this protocol. And then we switch back to the regular double off-sync and regular resync protocol, and we get back the same result as last year. So it's just an example to show you that the protocols can work pretty well, but it will depend on the setup, and we have to define. We are really good to implement, and we have the tools that are required to apply this type of protocols, right? If we are not going to apply it correctly, and this farm, for example, is a very good farm with compliance, they can give the shot, they can breed the cows by time AI perfectly. They were pretty bad on heat detection, and it was noticed here, right? So as a summary here for this presentation, there is not a unique recipe that works well in all farms, right? I just showed you that like a really good protocol can work really bad in some farms, in some facilities with some personnel. So we have to define what are we good at, right? Are we good at detecting cows in estrus and breeding cows in heat? Are we good with compliance, right? Can we give apply a protocol like double off in a very complex protocol in a timely manner and give all the shots that are required, right? Like first we need to define that. We need to define what are we good at. Then define the objectives. Okay, do we want to maximize breeding cows in estrus, or do we want to maximize breeding cows by time AI? Some people prefer breeding cows in estrus, so they have spread that out during the different days of the week. Other people prefer to have a lot of cows bred just one day of the week. We do weekly cohort, right? The other important concept here is that we can get good results with programs that have 100% time AI or programs that are combined, right? Like combined estrus detected insemination and time AI. And I think that's following what Julio showed last week, that you can target some cows that will perform well with this type of management, and you can target some cows that will perform well with this one, and then you can get the best of both, right? And then we don't have to forget about all the other factors that affect not only fertility at first services, but also time to pregnancy during lactation, right? This is very important. We tend to focus on all that things that we can manage as a repro physiology, repro management, but then there is all these other factors that will impact repro, and they're out of our control if we just focus on the cow's back. Okay, thank you very much. That's all for today. I'm open to any questions. And here's my email. We don't have enough time for questions.
Thank you so much, Matias. So before we have one question before we get into that. So thank you again to our sponsor, CattleScan. And then remember, we still have one more webinar session next week. So, oh, I lost.
Can you?
I lost. Sorry. Yeah. So we have. Oh, I'm losing. Sorry, give me a second.
No problem.
Margaret,
okay.
Can you help me with the question? We have one
Thank
question.
you, Daniela. I'm just open the questions here, and I can see the questions. So the first question, if you guys can see, is that it's an example of a farm that have a 65-day voluntary waiting period and have a 30% of the cows that are not cyclic, at least no showing estrus with activity monitor, right? Like SCR or AFI monitors. And what do you think is the problem, and if it is normal at 30%? Well, that's a really good question, right? And my idea was to mention something about that, right? Like, if we are doing a protocol that is just based on prostaglandins, right, we depend on cow cyclicity to breed those cows in heat. If you have a big percentage of cow not cyclic, like that 30%, those cows will not be synchronized with the pre-sync off-season. Now, having said that, a protocol like double off-season will force them to ovulate and will fix part of that issue, right? That's the advantage of this type of generate-based protocol that fix all these small issues and give you like a very high fertility. The 30% is relative, right? If we are talking about a farm, for example, in Mexico, in a place with like a pretty severe heat stress that are not having good heat stress abatement, right? I would say that is not uncommon to see something like that, right? And then it's also not uncommon to see, if you give PGs and you breed 70% of the cows after PGs and not more than that, it's not also uncommon, because there is a limitation in the physiology for the cows to show heat. Some cows, even though they are cyclic, they don't show heat. So that 30% could be a combination of anovular cows, or could be cows that are not just biologically not showing heat after the PG. So advices, right? And again, health issues might affect cyclicity, body condition score might affect cyclicity. I think the advices might be to conduct, go to the farm, boots on the ground, conduct an overall evaluation, check body condition score, check incidence of health disorder during the transition period, check your ration, see if the nutrient requirements are met, and we have a ration that allows those cows to perform well. And if all that is fixed, and you still are seeing that, now you have to differentiate if those cows are anovular, really no showing heat 30%, or it's just, if you don't have a CL, or it's just a matter of heat detection or heat expression, right? So after that, if you still wanna, that's what it's complicated, right? Because that 30% could be cows that are in a regular farm with pre-sync off-season, we're breeding about 70% of the cows in heat, not 100%. So you still have 30% of the cows are not breeding heat, and it's normal, right? So if you want to avoid that and you want to maximize the fertility, and you trust that the compliance can be good, you can switch to a generate-based protocol, right? What is they open, and how calculated, and how much cost are they open? Oh, that's a pretty long. It's not a pretty long question. It's a short question with a pretty long answer, right? In general, both Julio and I agree that we don't like to calculate the days open per. So the days open change depending. So the cost of a day open change depending of the days in mill, the mill production, like a lot of different stuff. So it's super complicated to just estimate one. There are some estimations. I think the value of a pregnancy. There are some papers of Albert Debris about it, but the value of a pregnancy are just much on target. And then the other thing about the other thing here about how it's calculated. The problem with days open is that it only includes pregnant cows, so it's another. It's a good parameter to evaluate, but it's not perfect because it only evaluates the cows that become pregnant. So let's say I have 100 cows in the herd. I have only 5 cows pregnant, but those cows pregnant, I got them pregnant first service at 60 days. My days open will be 60 days, which will be amazing, but I have 90% of the cows open. So it's not really a good parameter sometimes to evaluate. Great. Sorry, Daniela, I don't know. You can see the questions now.
Yeah, no, I don't know what happened with my computer. I'm not seeing anything right now. Sorry about that.
I can help you out.
Thank you.
Michael Smith asks, we recently started using electronic heat detection and have seen great results. Currently, we use pre-sync ob-sync with our new voluntary waiting period at 80 days in milk. We would like to move our voluntary waiting period back, and we would like to transition into less shots. What is your suggestion, Matias?
Well, my suggestion is to watch Julio's presentation last week. Not because I'm lazy, it's because he was just going like deep into the targeted repro management and divided cows. For example, if they some of the data he showed is dividing cows if they show heat in the first, I don't remember that 30 or 40 days in milk, based on activity monitors, and if they show heat before that, those cows just go with less shots. You can wait more time, or you can just give PGs. And if the cow that didn't show heat, we go to a little bit more, not complicated, but a more with a program with a little bit more shots, but it maximizes the fertility and don't let those cows just get like bred super late during the lactation, right? It kind of, I think Julio's presentation that week is trying to address this type of question, right? Like, okay, you can short voluntary waiting period for some of the cows that are already healthy and cyclic, and in that I divide it just in 4 big buckets, but you can start dividing or subdividing the cows based on, do they show heat in the first 40 days in milk? Do they have any health disorder during transition? What is their milk production, etc.? And then start manage differently those cows. So that's kind of Julio's approach.
Okay, we have another question. Gonna drop down to, do you advise not making timed AI at the end of a double ob-sync and make EDAI for 1 week, then to undergo 7-day CEDAR? Can I get a better result by shifting to this protocol? Can you read the question and understand?
Yes.
Okay,
No, I understood. That was kind of the last part we showed. We ran this trial in 1 day. It worked pretty well. We improved fertility doing that by 7 percentage points, and we improved, especially in the greater result was in first lactation. Having said that, we implemented in farms in New York and some farms in Mexico. Again, no control and treatment, just implementation. They're working well, with the exception of that term that I showed you that they weren't conducting wood heat detection. So I said, we say like it's a very robust program. But having said that, there are several factors that are important, right? If you want to implement something like that, you have to make sure you have really good heat detection, right? That is essential. Activity monitors, if you have activity monitors, that's great. Second one, when we did this trial and we compared these two, we did it in just only 1 farm. So we don't have external validity. I just implemented it, like we started implementing in other farms, and it's working pretty good. But again, we don't have a control group, so I can't say we have external validity. So these two are very important, right? The third one that you have to define is that what you really want to do, right? Like, do you want to maximize? What is your objective? There are farms that want to maximize breeding cows in heat. There are farms that hate breeding cows in heat, and there are farms that really hate using seeders, right? They don't like to put seeders. So I think depend a little bit of a lot of things in the management there. You can apply, you can be very successful, you can get the best of both. I think that there are more replications of these type of studies are needed to make sure it works as we did. Another fourth factor, in the farm we did this study, they were breeding cows more than once a day. And in most of the farm we implemented, they are breeding cows at least twice a day, in the afternoon and in the morning. So I think we need to validate this type of trial in a farm that are breeding only once a day, just in the morning, right? A lot of farms are just breeding in the morning, especially for sex semen. When we did that, that difference was observed both in sex and in beef semen or conventional semen, but it still need to be validated in a farm that breeds cows only once a day.
Sounds good. Okay, here's a specific situation. If I'm using double OVSync program and I'm using 55-day voluntary waiting period, do you advise starting the protocol at 55 days of milk or to end at 55 days of milk? Currently, I'm starting the sync program at 55 days of milk and timed AI at about 82. What is your advice?
Well, we didn't have time to present it. It wasn't the topic of the presentation, but part of my PhD with Julio was doing a large study on voluntary waiting period. The best data we have so far is that short voluntary waiting period for older cows, so lactation 2 and greater, benefits economically from shorter voluntary waiting period. In that case, we compare 60 days versus 88 days, or almost 90 days, like 30 days different. And economically, it was better for the short voluntary waiting period, right? And we also have a farm with three groups, one with a pre-sync opting on 50 days voluntary waiting period, breeding cows in heat, and it was very similar to the double ops in 60 days. So those benefit with shorter voluntary waiting period. Lactation 1, those are cows that are more persistent. Those are cows that are growing. Those are cows that have oil requirement. Those animals, when we did the economic analysis, they benefit for longer voluntary waiting period. And in this case was 60 versus 88. But again, it could be a little bit shorter, but longer. But those, so you can manage different voluntary waiting periods, ideally a little bit longer for lactation 1 than for younger cows, right? Sorry, for older cows. And just by the way, the economic analysis includes also part of their second lactation, right? Not just not finishing the first lactation, because whenever you extend the lactation and you evaluate just the lactation that was extended, you see a benefit of the extended lactation. There will be more days producing, but then you also have to take into account that cows with shorter lactation will calve again, and we'll have another peak, and we'll have another production. So we need to follow for multiple lactations.
Great, thank you. For the resync of open cows, do you advise using G6G protocol?
Yeah, G6G is a protocol that works pretty well. It can be used for first service and it can be used for second and subsequent services. I don't know if I call it G6G. I think Julio talked about this, the give a generate, and then it's GGPG, some people call, not just a G6G, because the G6G, sorry, I'm getting confused for the one that not going to Reaper manner. The G6G, this breeding organization use a PG, 2 days later a generate, and then 6 days later you start the offseason. So it takes quite a bit of time. What we usually do with those cows that are not cyclic, for example, in the resync, is we don't give this PG. We start with a generate, and 7 days later, we start the offseason. It's called like GPG, because it's kind of a generate and then an offseason. And instead of doing a G6G, it's just you give 7 days, because if you are doing weekly cohorts, it fix your weekly activities, right? It fit well, like if you give a generate on Monday, you check this cow is open, you give a generate the following Monday, the cow appeared again, you give another generate and start the offseason. But both of them can work. The thing is that the GPG, the G6G, as mentioned there, by paper, if you just focus on the definition of the G6G, it's a little bit more complicated to implement because of the days of the week.